And we're back now with our panel. Well, let's start with you, Dr. Land of the Southern Baptist Convention. You heard Cardinal Dolan talk about the separation of church and state. Do you think there should be, and where is the line?
Well, absolutely. And Baptists, that's our unique contribution to the Reformation, is separation of church and state. Roger Williams said for any human being to coercively interfere with another human being's relationship with his or her God is soul rape. And we believe that. We believe absolutely in the separation of church and state to protect the church from the state. Roger Williams said that there needed to be a wall of separation between the wilderness of the state and the garden of the church to protect the garden of the church from the intrusion of the state. And I think that that's the thing that's changed since 1960, is that in 1960 the concern was whether there was going to be an established church. I don't think anyone's concerned about an established church today, but there are many of us who are concerned about government intrusion on the free exercise of faith by people who have religious convictions, who run contrary to what the government wants them to do. And separation of church and state is the separation of two institutions. It never was intended to mean the separation of religiously informed morality from public policy. My personal hero, Martin Luther King Jr., was a Baptist preacher. And he said he was in that Birmingham jail because he refused to obey an unjust law. And it was an unjust law because it didn't coincide with the moral law of God.
Let me go to Rabbi Wolpe. What's your idea of the separation, Rabbi?
Well, I think that it is true that Jews have a certain perspective on this, as minority traditions do, because generally when religion seeps into the public sphere, it's not our own. And so the separation of church and state in part is a protection for minority traditions. Having said that, I think that everybody has to understand that if you believe that the creator of the universe, or the animating spirit of the universe, or however you conceive of God, wants you to do a certain thing, you can't segregate that inside your soul from your public pronouncements and your beliefs. The key separation comes when you have to make public policy, and then you have to make arguments that are acceptable to all different traditions and no tradition. So the real separation is not in your conscience or your pronouncements or your beliefs. It is in the arguments that you have to make that will be acceptable to everyone else. Nobody's allowed to say my faith is the trump card, and therefore in public policy you have to do what I say because this is what I believe.
Louis Cortes, Reverend Cortes, where do you see the line?
Well, I believe the line needs to be in a space that allows people to take their faith and put it in the public sphere. And it doesn't mean that you will oppress other people with it or enforce other people with it, but people will be allowed to share it. So my concern is, in following with Richard and the rabbi, is that more and more we're being told that we're being told not to bring our faith into the public sphere, as if it's a disqualifier for public discourse, which it isn't and it shouldn't be. So my concern is that every year, as time goes by, the rights of the religious are being eroded under the guise of church and state.
Andrew Sullivan, you wrote this piece in Newsweek, an extraordinary piece called Crisis in Christianity. What did you take away from what you just heard the Cardinal say?
Well, my view is very similar to what Rabbi Wolpe said, which is that I think our ability to be reasonable in politics and faithful in religion and to keep those two things separate has atrophied to the great disadvantage of religion. And what has happened since 1960 is that organized groups like Southern Baptist Council and other religious groups have in fact become self-consciously political. They've become fused with one political party, the Republican Party, a party who's now has a majority and defined by a particular religious faith, evangelicalism or far-right Catholic hierarchy. And that is making many people feel that faith in Jesus is about politics and power and partisanship in ways that's turning off an entire generation. The biggest growth in any belief sector in this country the last 10 years has been atheism. And the younger generations who see these religious people wielding political power endorsing essentially political candidates and fusing themselves with one political party and picking fights deliberately. The Cardinal prepared for this fight with Obama on a political grounds. They see, and I think they're muddying the real radical truth of Jesus, which is that we will gain power by giving it up. That we do not seek in the public sphere to have any power, but to be powerless. And Jesus was absolutely apolitical, anti-political. Given the chance to be political, he's only on the cross because he refused politics.
I'm going to let Dr. Land respond to that in a minute, but I want to get around the table first. Sally, you have been monitoring this with your On Faith blog and page in the Washington Post. Sum up what we just heard here and what this is all about.
I think that separation of church and state is in the eye of the beholder. And I think if you look at not only what's going on in politics, you'll get Cardinal Dolan to say one thing about his view of separation in church and state, and we have several different views at this table. We say we have separation of church and state, and yet on our coins it says, "In God we trust." The Pledge of Allegiance is one nation under God. We have ministers and pastors, a Senate chaplain who says prayers in the Senate. The academies, the military academies, are very religious, have prayer groups and sometimes mandatory prayer groups. And so those are all not separation of church and state, and yet everyone accepts them. So I think that what I've seen in the last 5 years and what I see every single day is that whatever your point of view, you might, I mean, there are plenty of people, I don't know whether you all think that we are a Christian nation or not. There are plenty of people who are religious who would say this is a Christian nation. Other people will say, as Obama does, this is a nation for all faiths and no faith. So I think that when you talk about separation of church and state, you're not talking about one thing. You're talking about a lot of different attitudes and opinions.